Yo, what's going on, you guys? Your boy Devvon Raw in raw form, and welcome to another Help Me Devvon Raw tutorial. And today, in this Help Me Devvon Raw tutorial, I'll be showing you guys and girls how to mix female R&B vocals. Now, before we go any further, I will ask you guys to subscribe and give this video a like to keep this channel going and to be up to date with more of our videos that we have coming. Also, you can go on over in the description to our helpmedevon.info website at any time to get some of our presets, vocal chains, templates, and a bunch of other goodies for your DAWs. Now, let's get right to it. Okay, so what I'm going to do for you right now is I'm going to play you the song and the vocal in context with the music. Listen close.
Go figure, you were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view. When you knew the picture was bigger, who am I kidding? Knew from the beginning, you'd ruin everything. You do it every time. You are my enemy.
Okay, so you can hear that. This is like a Jhené Aiko style vocal. No, that is not Jhené Aiko. That is a very talented young singer named Saika Benz. I'll leave her in the bio below or in the description. We're also using the Flowers and Roses vocal chain, which is in the helpmedevon.info store. So if you want to follow along with me step by step with this, you can go in the description below, pick your DAW, and download it. It comes for every DAW, basically. Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton, Studio One, and FL Studio. Now, when it comes to mixing female vocals, there's two things, or basically one general thing that I think about when it comes to, in comparison to males, as far as how I differentiate them. Female vocals tend to be brighter. A female vocal tends to have a higher register when it comes to their vocals. This is kind of obvious, I'm gonna assume, if you're a mix engineer or doing anything like that. So when it comes to those female vocals, I tend to roll off more of the low end. Why? Because it's not there. It doesn't exist. I tend to really accentuate the high end or the brightness because that character in the female vocal is very prevalent. So what I like to do is I like to keep those things in mind when I attack these vocals. Female vocals are brighter. Okay, naturally. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come on over to my EQ. Now, just like I told you before, when it comes to EQing the female vocals, I know in my head that there's really not a lot of information down below like a male vocal would be. And I'll show you, for example, with this RTA EQ. Check out the low end side of the vocal.
Go figure, you were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view. When you knew the picture was bigger, who am I kidding?
So when I look down there, there's really nothing down there in the sense of that's really adding to the entire vocal. It's really probably just room, tone, hum, just a bunch of stuff that I don't want. So when it comes to female vocals, I like to get more clarity out of them by rolling a lot of that low end off because they just don't need it when it comes to that. So that's always important when it comes to this. I'll turn all this stuff off so you can get an idea. So I'll bypass it back and forth so you can get an idea of what I did with the EQ. Check this out. Let's solo this as well.
Go figure, you were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view. When you knew the picture was bigger, who am I kidding? Knew from the beginning.
So right off rip, you could hear there's so much more clarity. There's so much more room. The vocal feels like it's brighter, and that's without adding or boosting any EQ. That's literally just subtracting those frequencies, which I tell you guys all the time. Subtractive EQ first, and I guarantee you, let that guide you into your brightness to figure out how much brightness you actually need. So this is what I did on my EQ, rolled off a bunch of the low end, took some more out at the 314 hertz range just to get rid of more of that mud. And this is basically how I like to EQ the female vocal. I like to take out some of these frequencies that I know are just not necessary. And that's definitely in that bottom end. 314 can be needed sometimes. Of course it can, but I typically like to take that out for some of the mud and stuff like that. Okay. Now, when it comes to the RDSer or anything like that, there's a few things in here that are really important, okay? And that's really what I want to focus on as opposed to going through every single plugin that's here. I used a de-esser, which is pretty self-explanatory. I used another EQ, and this is the EQ that's important. This is the EQ that I really get a lot of the character out of the female vocal. Check this out, with and without.
Go figure, you were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view. When you knew the picture was bigger, who am I kidding?
So I got a lot of the character that I wanted out of their vocal. It's bright, it's airy, it sounds great as far as what I like. Now I know what you're saying. Hey, this sounds pretty thin, like I always tell you guys, and I always bring that back when it comes to the compressor. But like I said, I always like to do the EQing first at the top so that I can actually take and boost the good stuff and not the bad stuff when it comes to after the compression. So check this out, what I did for the female vocal. I did a trick that I typically do. I basically rolled off a ton of the low end, like I showed you guys before. I rolled off even more low end from the 300 hertz range and below. I took out some of the 890 hertz, which is a typical thing that I do, but especially in female vocals, I'm getting rid of these low end frequencies that I really want to stay away from to really get that resonance at that top, that beautiful top end of the vocal. I took out some of the 3.5 kilohertz range. Typical thing I always do, take that bad boy out because I don't want that to be jarring to your ear. It's the pain frequency. I don't enjoy it. I like to take some of it out before it even gets to boosting. Here's the beautiful part. What I did was I boosted at the 11,000 hertz range. Now, this is a typical range I boost, but I love to boost this for female vocals. When it comes to boosting the high end for females vocals, it just shines. It just cuts through so wonderfully. And this is where you get that silkiness from that female vocal because it already exists within the actual vocal. So this is why when you're boosting compared to a male vocal, there's just a different sound that a female vocal tends to sonically have. So for me, this is what I went with, and this is what you have so far. Okay, next thing I'm going to move on to is I'm going to move on to my analog saturation because I'm focusing on the things that I do that are special to the female vocal that I always do for the female vocal. So after some compression with my CLA 76, which I love this compressor for female vocals because it has a bright hiss to it and I like the way it handles brightness. Check this out. I'll let you get an idea what it sounds like.
Go figure. You were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view when you knew the picture was bigger.
I just like what it does to high end. So this is why I use this particular compressor for female vocals. I always use this for female vocals. Unless I want a little bit more bottom out of a female vocal, then I'll go on to the bluey setting, which is right here. I noticed that this feels a little bit warmer, but when it came to this Jhené Aiko style of vocal, I just knew I wanted it to be airy and bright. So that's why I went with the Blackie. Okay, so a few more compressors after that, right? The next thing that is really special to the female vocal is the analog saturation. Now, when it came to my analog saturation, what I did was this, and I'll bypass it back and forth so you can get an idea what it sounds like. Check this out.
Go figure, you were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view. When you knew the picture was bigger, who am I kidding?
So what the analog saturation did for me was it added some upper harmonics to her voice. Now, it added some harmonics to the entire thing, but where I noticed it the most is where it accentuates, and that's basically at that top end. It just added harmonics, and it made the vocal feel even more exciting and more special. And this is why I like to add this to my female vocals. I like to add a little bit more of the analog saturation to the female vocal because it just adds some really dope things to the upper harmonics of the vocal. And what I did was I boosted it about 2.5 dB at that top end coming from the 800 hertz range. And I took out some of the treble in there because I liked what the harmonics were doing, but it was a little too bright. So I took it down just a little bit within that. Okay. Next thing I like to do is something that I feel like is very important with my female vocals. This is probably the biggest trick to my female vocals. I like to add an upward compressor. Now, I'll leave a description below to what upward compression is, but just know that when it comes to upward compression, it's just a different style of compression that kind of works like an expander as well, where basically, instead of the concept of gain reduction, it's actually boosting or bringing a signal up when it passes the threshold. Don't get too tied up. Just check this out. So basically, you see this piece right here. This is the MV2 from Waves, which I love. It says low level. Basically, it's going to bring up the things or the frequencies, basically the sounds that it sees that are low in level. So if anything is low in level, it's going to bring that stuff up as I bring up this knob. And when it comes to this high level, this works as a common or typical compressor, which compresses. But this low level is going to bring out some nuances in the vocal that I wouldn't have been able to bring out if I didn't probably have this. So check this out. I'll bypass it back and forth. Listen close.
Go figure. You were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view When you knew the picture was bigger, who am I kidding?
So it's a very subtle thing, but there's this more controlled vocal that comes out of the other side of this plugin. And that's why I like this so much. It controlled a little bit of those peaks at the top, but it also brought out these really subtle nuances that I like. And that's why I like to use this for female vocals, especially. Because when it comes to those female vocals, I'm really looking for these nuances that are really beautiful within the female voice that typically, I'm not saying a male voice doesn't have, but there's something special to that female vocal. And I like to bring that stuff out as much as I can. So I use that MV2 to really bring out those really small nuances in that vocal with the female. Okay. The next other trick that I have after I did some minor EQing was this plugin called One Night Brighter. Now, I know what you're saying. You're going to add more brightness. Yes, because when it comes to the female vocal, that's really the thing that really stands out to me the most when it comes to these female R&B vocals is they're very bright, they're very silky, and I get a lot of that from this One Knob Brighter, especially when it comes to like a Jhené Aiko style of vocal. If I'm saying her name wrong, I apologize. Okay, so let's bypass this, and I'll bypass this back and forth. Check this out.
Go figure, you were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view. When you knew the picture was bigger, who am I kidding? Knew from the beginning.
So I love this because it added presence as well as a nice top end to it while controlling the top end. So that's what I like about the One Knob Brighter is that you can boost this thing. And I know there's all kinds of processes in this algorithm of this plugin where there's compression, there's de-essing that's controlling that brightness as you get it. So that's why I like to just turn that thing and just get a little bit more out of it without actually messing up what I originally had there as is. So this One Knob Brighter allows me to push my brightness a little further, which I love to do for female vocals. Okay. The next thing, or basically the last thing as far as dynamic plugins or just my inserts is concerned, is I like to add a little bit more of the analog saturation. And I use this especially for the typical modern day female R&B vocals is because a lot of these female R&B vocals sound bright, but there's this dirty, grungy analog sound that it also has as well. Kind of like a lo-fi, hi-fi mix when it comes to a vocal. And I like to accomplish that using the Kramer tape when it comes to vocals. It's going to add some harmonics into the vocal that make it feel a little bit more grungier. It's going to make the brightness feel a little different, and it's going to make the female vocal just feel like a whole other thing. Check this out.
Go figure, you were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view. When you knew the picture was bigger, who am I kidding? Knew from the beginning. You ruin everything, you do it every time. You are my enemy.
So what I noticed is so many different things. I noticed that it felt like it got even more bright or intelligible as far as the intelligence frequencies, like the 6 kilohertz range. I feel like it got boosted in that presence range. I just feel like the vocal just kind of felt like it was this loose kind of thing to this tamed animal. Like it was just so tamed and so tight. And that's what I like about this analog saturation emulation plugin, Kramer tape, is because this is what this thing does. It adds analog saturation or harmonics to the vocal that I otherwise would have to pretty much sit and kind of tweak before I find, but this thing just does it like this. It works like an old school tape machine. So the way that it handles high end as far as compressing that high end and that low end bringing some stuff out, it's really, really powerful in what it does. Analog saturation, guys, it's probably the biggest trick when it comes to mixing these R&B female vocals. Okay. The last thing I'm going to show you guys is probably, obviously, it's just as important as anything else. It's basically the effects processing. And when I say that, I mean like the reverbs. And this is huge in female R&B vocals. And I'll show you this right now. So basically, let's show you, I'm going to show you the short verb first. And with the short verb, what I'm doing is I'm using a plate verb from Valhalla Vintage Verb. And long story short, the reason why I pretty much use plate verbs on all my vocals is because all a plate verb does is really it adds like this stereo feeling to your vocal. And you can decide if you want a dark stereo feel or a bright stereo feel or whatever kind of tone you want for your stereo feel. But it actually takes that center vocal and adds this plate verb that is stereo and makes your vocal just feel more stereo. Check this out.
Go figure, you were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view. When you knew the picture was bigger, who am I kidding? Knew from the beginning.
So the play verb is so powerful, and a lot of people think that even with rap vocals, they don't use this. This thing is used on everything. Play verbs are so powerful, and if you're not using it, you are missing out on so many things because you get the opportunity to have a verb or basically a lead vocal that feels more stereo, that has more space, and just has more width, and you get more loudness out of the vocal. You do get a vocal that pretty much sits better on top of the mix. Love plate verbs. Next thing I did for the female vocal was I added a long verb. And basically what I did was I used a common thing that I love to use is this vintage, it's this Valhalla vintage verb with my large R Hall preset. And I used the 1970s preset because I like the sound and how it tails off of the vocal. Check this out.
Go figure, you were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view. When you knew the picture was bigger, who am I kidding? Knew from the beginning. You'd ruin everything, you do it every time. You are my enemy, you are no friend of
So
mine.
I love this verb, especially for my female vocals. I use it on my own vocals personally too. But I love it definitely on female vocals because it sounds vintage and warm. And that's so common in alternative R&B or the modern day R&B vocals when it comes to Jhené Aiko's, SZA's, which we have templates and vocal chains for in the description below at any time at helpmedevvon.info. And this is what makes it so powerful and so important is using these types of processing to give you that feeling of space and dimension and things like that. Last thing I use is this doubler plugin. And basically all I do with the doubler is I use a basic doubler setting. So long story short, it's taking a copy of one vocal, another vocal, and basically boosting it up on the side. So I just have a little bit more of a stereo feel. So on top of my plate verb, I'm getting a little bit more of a stereo feel out of the vocal. So check this out with and without. It's a very subtle thing.
Go figure, you were the trigger. You brought me to an obstructive view. When you knew the picture was bigger, who am I kidding? Knew from the beginning. You'd ruin everything, you do it every time.
So what you notice is you felt like it also got brighter when I engaged it. Well, this is the trick that I like to do with my doubler. I like to boost the high end on my doubler. So the two vocals that are being boosted on the sides actually have a little bit of high end. So it feels more airy and more spacious when I actually bring that doubler in. It's a cool trick to do to your doubler, especially for female vocals, because it makes that female vocal feel what? Angelic. And that's what a lot of these vocals will feel like. Super angelic, like they just float on a beat. And this is the good trick to use. Put a doubler on, throw it up, and boost the high end on the doubler plugin so that you get a brighter sound on your side information. And that's basically it. So that was my tutorial on how to mix female R&B vocals. Now, granted, although I didn't go through every single plugin, I rather have went through just the pieces that I feel like you should incorporate into your own mixes when it comes to female vocals to add to those things, the nuances. But at any time, you can go to our website at helpmedevvon.info and download this actual template to see every nuance as far as the EQs and all those things that I use. I hope you enjoyed that. Make sure you comment, like, subscribe once again. Make sure you follow us at helpmedevvon on the Instagram. You can also email us your questions, comments, or concerns at helpmedevvon@gmail.com. And until next time, you guys and girls.